Welcome to the show All Things Writing. I am your host, Brian the Writer. Let me take you on a journey through my writing life and introduce you to some of the amazing talent that exists in the writing world. Whether you are looking for a little advice or just to catch an interesting interview, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. All Things Writing starts now. I'm kidding. You would never fire a gun like that. Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. I am Brian the Writer. By the way, this is actually a firing weapon. It is called a 38-200. You can't buy ammo for it anymore. This is basically a history piece. Yes, it belongs in a museum, but it's a family heirloom. So I've been holding on to it. It was my grandfather's. It is a caliber that nobody makes anymore, so it's quite old. The reason I'm using it today is to sort of give you an idea to what the interview is going to be all about today. I have as a guest today Dr. Bruce Farmer. Now, Dr. Farmer writes novels on, he's kind of that thriller, intrigue, the spies, and military fiction genre. Very excited. I don't do a ton of interviews of people in that genre because I'm mainly a horror guy, but I am super excited to have him on the show today because I guess military thrillers were sort of my first love in a way because I love that well-written interplay between, different militaries and different forces running together. Very, very excited to have him on the show today. So, without further ado, let's welcome to the show Dr. Bruce Farmer. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. It's wonderful to be here.
It's the honor is all mine. So I have a question that I always start every show with. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I guess that's more of a request, not really a question.
Well, I'm a 71-year-old guy and have lived a pretty adventuresome life. Currently, we're living in North Georgia, but I've spent most of my life in Oregon, in the
Okay.
in the Northwest, and that has shaped a great deal of my experience. I graduated from Portland State University in 1977, and then went into medical school and trained in surgery. Ended up doing emergency medicine work throughout the state, and and then it was 1999. I've been going to seminary since 1988, taking one class a semester because I just enjoyed studying the Bible. And then in
What
19
what what did the turtle say? Slow and steady.
yes, exactly. So in 1999, I just had this desire that had been with me forever to try and tackle a millennial old question, which is how do you explain the coexistence of sovereignty, where
Hmm.
God is in charge of everything, and the fact that we are people of free will? How is it possible? So I didn't go to seminary, and I left medicine. I went into seminary, and not to be a pastor or anything like that. I wanted to study philosophical theology and address this question.
Okay.
So after that, my back went out, and I ended up having surgery, and then I ended up developing a new method, if you will, a combination of many things for the treatment of severe low back pain.
Mm.
And Fitness Therapeutics had a good relationship with Oregon Health Sciences University, and we went into a research program. We were waiting for the grant money, and in 2016, the grant fell through. And I had a real crisis at that point. But out of that crisis came the book. Now, I have three wonderful kids, five grandkids. I love skiing steep and deep. I've climbed 16 of those peaks, Rainier and all of those things. I love mountaineering, snow and ice, and I really like rafting. And
Hmm.
2 years ago, one of my bucket lists is went down the Grand Canyon, the Colorado,
Okay.
and then
Cool.
a year later went climbed Kilimanjaro, and then this last year, my wife to be and I did a world cruise, and so we are of an adventuresome cast. We like to be out and active and doing things, and that's reflected, I believe, in the book. The book expresses kind of my experience in the emergency, in trauma, in the emergency room, in travel and climbing, things like that. My dad was a lieutenant colonel in the Army who was a veterinarian, but the Army took him
Hmm.
out of the veterinary program and trained him in nuclear physics. And in
That sounds
19,
like something the Army would do.
yes, well, in 1959, he ended up we were transferred to Las Vegas, and he was part of Area 51 and above ground nuclear testing. And I still remember going on the test site as a young kid, not knowing anything other than seeing these huge craters in the middle of the desert and wondering what's going. And I would ask him, and he could say nothing. He
Hmm.
was he would simply kind of point his finger at this big hole and smile. That was what Q clearance required. So my upbringing was military.
Hmm.
It was where you keep secrets. Secrets are kept because that's the nature of the game. So that was
Yeah.
upbringing, and then on to school and other things. Yeah.
So that's very interesting. I don't think a lot of people realize that, and I've had plenty of friends that have gone to seminary. There are other things you go to seminary for other than just becoming a pastor. There are a lot of different tracks that people can take to delve into those deeper questions.
This is true. I've
Hmm.
always been philosophically minded and have always been intrigued in how it was possible for these things to coexist. And it really was a gripping, by the time 2000 came around, I said, I really want to pursue this. And
Yeah.
so I came up with a thesis, and it's an attempt, a compatibilist, what's called a compatibilist approach that says they both exist simultaneously at the same time. God is
Yeah.
completely sovereign, or biological determinism, if you don't hold to a God. Biological determinism is present along with human free will.
Yeah. If you can't, I always say that if you can't accept Christianity's ability to ask both of these questions together, then your God is way too small.
Yeah, I mean, it really. I mean, G.K. Chesterton is often considered the greatest apologist for the 20th
Hmm.
century for the Christian faith. Of
Hmm.
course, C.S. Lewis, along they had their little ink spots. They had a club in Oxford, Cambridge called the Ink Spots, and J.R. Tolkien, C.S.
Yeah.
Lewis, G.K. Chesterton. We're talking about the greats. Were just dons. They'd get together on a Friday night and they would
Hmm.
present papers on various things. And they had an offer to anyone, ever, wherever. that they could give a talk to them,
Mhm.
atheism, agnostic, whatever it might be. They only had to appear the next Friday to receive their response.
Hmm.
And so that was Tolkien read The Lord of the Rings to this group, and they critiqued
Hmm.
him. As long as C.S. Lewis read his trilogy and all the Narnian
Wow.
Chronicles and was critiqued big time by these friends of his. And so it's an interesting discussion.
The big brains of the time.
Yes.
So I'm now basically you've already admitted that you have this philosophical mind, this quizzical mind, and of course all of these different pursuits, being a doctor, going to seminary. Have you always had an interest in fiction writing?
Well, that is okay. Early on in high school, in junior high and high school, I was literary minded. My favorites at that time was Soren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche, the kind of
Okay,
the authors of existentialism,
sure.
and had some passing interest in poetry, but I really enjoyed writing and the literary world. When I decided to pursue science, that was just put away. And so I pursued science for nearly 50 years. When I went to seminary in the year 2000, it was an interesting time where I had two downloads in the space of about 1 week. And people describe these things. I had a flash. I looked out the window and I saw a flock of crows take off and realized I had a solution to sovereignty and free will in that flock of birds. And
Hmm.
I know it might seem crazy, but that was my flash of insight, and I pursued it. At the same time, well, how can a flock of birds be completely free and yet, in the next instant, they are not in China? They are, in essence, a body of objects, birds, that form something of beauty, that have
Hmm.
form and direction. And yet each bird is aware of his neighbor. And so, how is it that they can manage that? How is it that they can express their freedom and yet be controlled? So, I took that insight, that aha moment, and pursued it. That happened, and it was in that same period of time I was reading the book of Esther, in, and I was fascinated with this Jewish queen. She's the in the fifth century queen of Persia. I mean, she Artaxerxes. That was the Persian Empire. They controlled everything, and she's the queen. But no one
Hmm.
knows that she's Jewish.
Hmm.
She's completely incognito. And then arises Haman the Agagite, who goes after and says, I'm going to destroy all the Jews. And it's Esther's uncle, Mordecai, who gets word to her in the castle, in the fortress or whatever, and says, you know, if you don't do something, our nation can perish. And she said, I don't think you get it. I have not been summoned to the king's chambers or to the court in 30 days. And you don't walk into that court without being summoned. If you do, and he does not extend the royal scepter, you're toast. You're killed. And Mordecai says, well, who knows? Maybe you were born for such a time as this. And that became a gripping theme in my life, is wanting to know, wanting to say, I mean, that every person has this sense of destiny. We're all unique. And that question is, what are you doing right now? Maybe you were born for just this moment. Maybe you're being asked to step up and do something that only you can do the first time in the history of the world. Maybe this is why you were born. Well, and of course, she ends up rescuing the Jews. That's the Feast of Purim.
Mhm.
Well, I had this moment. I'm looking out, looking at birds going wacko, and yet in control, and I go, what would it be like to take that Persian queen and move her into our present century, the 20th century, and make her a spec ops elite sniper for the Israeli Defense Force, and put her in a spot where, as this tale goes, there will come a time when she gets the word from not Uncle Mordecai, but in the book, the director of the Mossad will say, you know, the man who's trying to kill you, guess what? He's developing nuclear tipped man portable rockets and is set to destroy Jerusalem not many days from now. We don't know where to find this guy, but it seems that every time we track you, he's after you. He knows where you are. So we want you to find him. And she basically says, that's nuts. You mean you want me to be like a goat, sacrificial goat? And he says, well, there are worse things. And when he comes after you, we'll be there. And he says, perhaps you were born for this moment. Only you can answer this call. So that's
Wow.
midway in the book.
So I suppose it's probably not a bad time to ask you. So I have not read the book. Um, so to ask you to tell everyone about the book, the first book in the series, before we
Yes.
get into that whole second book.
So Blood Sapphire's Revenge is the story of a 27-year-old staff sergeant or chief sergeant who is one of the gifted snipers in the world at that time. And that always floats around. There's always top 10 people. You can go, those are the top 10. Well, she's one of those. And she is called to take out a Al Qaeda high up and in Yemen. And she and her battle buddy are secretly brought in with helicopter, and they set up, and she ends up making this incredible shot, not knowing that in killing this man, Anashir Salam, she has killed the one guy who happens to be friends with an evil, or I'll just say an oligarch, a Ukrainian oligarch of vast wealth. And when he finds out that Salam is dead, has been murdered by her, he doesn't know who, he tells his henchman, Ivan Jurek, the bad guy, he says, I want you to find whoever did this, and I want you to kill them and make it bloody. Now, he does not know that this is the girl whose father he murdered 27 years earlier. And she has been looking for this guy, whom we call X, all her life. for revenge. Now he's after her, and she's about to discover that the guy who's after her is the guy she's been after for a long time. And as it develops, now the twist is that Hattie Abrams is an angst-ridden woman of great depth and inner turmoil. She
Okay.
fights with Friedrich Nietzsche and fights with Kierkegaard all the time. And she has concluded that it's better to kill herself than to continue living. She will not face another birthday going, yeah, my dad was murdered on this day. We're celebrating my birthday and he died on this day. I'm not going to do that anymore. And I don't find life very full of meaning anyway. I find it meaningless. So she goes and finds a place to commit harikiri, seppuku, and in the process, at the very last second, the voice steps in and she realizes things are very different in an instant. And she gets really hushed and says, "What do you want?" And this voice says, "What do you want?" She says, "I want to know why you killed my dad on the day that I was born." And the voice answers, "You have a choice, Nietzsche in the desert or Kierkegaard and leap into the Grand Canyon." And he says, "Leap, and you'll find your answer." And she does. She wakes up 3 hours later in this meadow and knows that something has happened. She's changed, but she goes back to base to her friend who thinks that she's committed suicide. And wow, things are great. So she goes out that evening with another chief sergeant, Ori Daniels, at a very nice bar in Tel Aviv. And in walks a young jihadi strapped with dynamite, opens up the coat, and Hattie and her date look at that and know it's over. That guy who does that has been sent by the henchman. And so the next moment, she's blown against the wall, and she ends up in the trauma in the operating room, goes in the ICU, wakes up 3 days later, and from that point on, understands only that she trusted in this voice, this presence, and look what happened to her. So she's furious, she's angry, but she's going, who tried to do this? And she ends up running for her life. And in the process, gets pushed back towards this guy called X. The more Hattie runs, the more she's drawn closer and closer to the man who's out to destroy her and her nation. She doesn't know that. And of course, in this mix, we have a love interest.
Of course.
We have the guy who develops the rockets. Francois Lecomte is a brainiac, and he falls in love with Brianna Ivanova, an escort from Russia, who has also been sent to destroy him. So there's a lot of things going on in the book that are intertwined. It's like a clockwork, and it happens over a 26-day period of time in 4 different places simultaneously: Manhattan, Tel Aviv, Odessa, Ukraine, and Donbas, Russia, which is by Sochi, in the Caucasus Mountains. So every day, the reader is taken from one place to another, and every single day, things the reader realizes I'm being sucked into a vortex here. I have to read what's going to happen, and that's it.
That's what we do as writers.
Yeah.
Suck you in and keep you reading. It's interesting. A couple themes sort of struck me there, but the one I found myself drawn to is this idea of running from something, and by doing so, you're running to it.
Yes.
And it just, I was thinking about this. It's a common theme in writing. We do that a lot, and I think it's almost a trick on the reader to a certain extent, but at the same time, it's a trick that the reader plays on themselves because we do it so often that, and I find myself doing that as a reader. I get to the end of the story and go, "Oh, well, I didn't see that coming. Well, I should have seen it coming. I mean, really, it should have been there." But, you know,
I what that allowed me to do is observe Susan Atwood, the great writer. Her
mhm,
advice was when you have a protagonist, you put that protagonist into every situation that pushes them to the brink.
yes.
And then when they're standing on the edge, you push them over.
Hmm.
And Hattie Abrams, in her flight from a man called X and his henchmen, who runs this big mob called the Sakharov Syndicate, she is put in impossible situations and takes the reader on a journey. And I've used, and I can't remember his name, Stephen. I have a book by a writer who talks about the four levels of questions each moment can provide the writer that draws in the reader. So if you say, she pulled a gun and shot him, well, so what? But he says, wait,
Yeah.
that's the first level. But the second question is, what, why is she doing this? The third level is, what would mother think?
Hmm.
What would General Patton think? What would the Dalai Lama think? What am I doing here? And then the fourth level has to do with this ground substance. Oh my goodness, I'm about to murder someone. Or is it murder? So this writer, it basically has you go through all these so that the reader is not left with she pulled out a gun and shot him, but seeing themselves in this dilemma, asking themselves, wow, if I'm going to shoot that person, is it murder or is it justified?
Yeah. You said that was in a book?
Yes, I've got it, and I'm trying to remember. I'm looking at my little library shelf,
Because I
and
think it's probably worth writing that down. Because I mean
yes,
that's
can I? What I'll do is I can do a little snapshot and send it to you if you want to
yeah.
share
If you
that.
could,
Yeah,
I'd appreciate it. Or just send it to me in email, and I'll put it up on the screen, and people can see what
yeah.
book we're referring to. Because
It really changed my writing, and then it's reflected in the storyline. The editor who really brought the book into its present form removed a lot of those questions. She said, "You've got every moment, this soul searching thing." She says, "Forget it." People are going to die reading all this.
yeah,
But she
there
kept
is
some of
too
those.
much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something I'm thinking about a lot right now because as I'm working on my current work in progress, I know there are parts where I always say, well, I'm phoning it in here. Why am I not, why am I not going deeper? Why am I not getting more out of this? And I really
Yeah.
do need to get more out of it. But I
Yeah.
think that's good advice for writers in general. But
Yeah.
you at one point got Oh, and by the way, I was also going to comment too, that whole series where your main character is hearing the voice.
Yes,
All I could think about is the "Here I am, Lord,"
yes.
the voice
Well,
responding to it.
I specifically did not want this to be a quote Christian book. And it's
Sure.
not a Jewish book,
Hmm.
it's a thriller.
I
And
love it.
so when Hattie has her moment, we might call it a very divine moment,
Mhm.
but I didn't want to make this, oh, well, God's just stepped in. The voice is something that there's this presence within all of nature, all of creation. The voice bubbles up from within her marrow. It's
Mhm.
not like it's even out there. It comes up from within her, and she's flat on her face in fear and dread, going, "Oh my! I've just tried to kill myself, and now I'm not dead. I'm in front of something that's worse." And the voice, though, says, what do you want? What do you want?
I think that's there's a lot of times that our own inner voices are really just reflecting what our deep-seated psychological need truly is.
Yes.
And we sometimes it bubbles to the surface and you can hear it clear, like a voice
Yep.
talking to you.
Yes.
Yeah. So you decided you got done writing this book and you got it all done and it's very well received. And you started working on the next one. I'm curious, how was there a plan to always go write a second book?
Well, I started writing Blood Sapphire's Revenge in the year 2000. So I started this a long time ago. And as it turned out, I wrote a bit and then I'd put it down. I'd pick it up, put it down, and it just bumped along until in 2016 my business went bankrupt and I really did not know what to do. And so I sought some advice from a senior counselor or psychotherapist in the Carl Jung School from Zurich, Switzerland.
Hmm.
And she's in Portland. She's a very brilliant woman, Martha Blake. And so I I'd I have dreams. And if you know about Carl Jung, he interpreted over 80,000 dreams. He's the
Dream
master dream
therapy.
interpreter.
Yeah.
And so I came to her in distress, in perplexity, not knowing what direction I should take. And I said, "But I've had this dream." Well, she got out her pen and paper and went, "Tell me your dream." And I saw the figure of Robert Frost, and he was laying on his back at the bottom of a clear mountain stream that was running down a mountain, beautiful water, and he was on the bottom, and the water, the stream was frozen over. It had a layer of ice. He was trapped inside, and you could see that, like a fish, he was gasping for air. He wanted out. Well, along the edges of this stream, they were starting to melt because moonlight had come up. So Martha listened to this and said, "Well, have you ever been a poet?" And I said, "Well, when junior high, high school, I was, always been that kind of that way, but I put it away when I
Hmm.
chose medicine." Uh-huh. Do you understand the difference between moonlight and sunlight? I went, "Well, not really. Sunlight, the archetype of sunlight is where men and women do their jobs. They live their lives in a productive capacity to raise kids, earn a living, do things in the world. Moonlight is art, the artist, the writer, the poet. Moonlight is where the creativity occurs.
Okay.
We don't want a creative person as a physician in the ER going, well, I don't
No.
know what I should do, but I can come up with an idea. You want someone who knows exactly what's going on. But she said, so it's, first of all, we have moonlight bathing the scene, and it's starting to thaw. And I would suggest that there's a poet in you wanting to get out. And I had this kind of aha. I went, she said, are you writing anything right now? I said, oh my goodness. Well, I've had this book for 16 years that I up and down, but just recently I have started to return to it. She said,
Hmm.
well, then I think your unconscious, the deep, deep part of yourself, is suggesting a change in direction. And so from that dream, I put away all the science and I retired to a little spot on my in the forest, my dad's property, and I started writing. And I really haven't stopped since. At that time, in 2016, I saw this book as a trilogy like Lisbeth Salander and the Millennium Trilogy. And so I'm now in the second book, Blood Sapphire's Fury, and the third one will, if you know, Lord willing, move into a third. So that was my vision back then.
Well, so the second one comes out this year, right?
Well, that's the intent.
Okay.
It's when I write, I think readers will appreciate when they read Blood Sapphire's Revenge. It's everything is thoroughly researched, and so I spend. I think not Steinbeck, but Faulkner, it might have been Faulkner, who said for every 3 hours of writing required 24 hours of research for him.
Mm.
And I would
Yeah.
say that's about true. I'll spend 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I'm writing a chapter in Blood Sapphire's Fury that has to do with the internet and hacking. And
Hmm.
so I've spent weeks reading books and books and books on hacking and computers so that I have this character in Finland that I'm creating who will be one of these hackers who is a key to helping Hattie and her love interest Wolf save the world.
You have to have. Of course, it's easier for a horror writer because I've watched enough horror movies, and that's horror movies and horror novels tend to be your bread and butter. But um, you know, I think it's a little bit easier when when you're stabbing someone versus having to do hacking. Hacking's a little bit more, it's a lot of work. But lest I lest lest I suggest that horror writers are not that in depth. I have the medicological investigation of death
There you go.
on my book. This is the textbook that on figuring out how someone died.
You
But
bet. Forensic
as I
pathology.
yeah, I mean, I like to make sure that my serial killers are serial killery enough, and
Yep.
it's important to be genuine for your audience, I think.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So what is going to be the big connection? Walk me through some of the big major connective tissue between book one and book two.
Well, Blood Sapphire's Revenge. In the beginning, we learned very quickly that Hattie Abrams was part of one of these climbing expeditions on Mount Rainier. She flew in from Israel to do this kind of as a high schooler. And I was on Rainier and saw a lot of this, you know. And while she's climbing, there's another group, 3 guys who are coming down the mountain, and they cross paths, and her eyes connect with this man who is called Wolf James. He is a ranger, a master sergeant in the Rangers. He's been to many tours of duty, and he's kicking back, and their eyes connect, and in that moment, they know, beyond knowing, that that person is their soulmate. But they continue walking. And at the moment she's about ready to kill herself, she's reflecting on that moment and asking that question, what is it about a face where you know that person was your person, but you let the moment go? And I never knew love. And that guy, Wolf James, has amber eyes. So he's a very, so at the same time, Wolf James has a family. He's from Ukraine. And, but now and so he's faced with this, some mob murdered his family, and he's out to find out who they are. As it turns out, it's connected to the bad guy. But in his quest, he's also haunted by this moment on Mount Rainier when he saw this woman's eyes and went, why did I let that go? And so he spends 9 years of his life trying to track that woman down. And finally, he can't find her and decides, give it up, buddy. Give it up. She's probably dead. And because of the trauma of that event, he starts sketching. And he sketches nudes. And he becomes a really good artist. So while he's out, and then he leaves the Rangers and becomes a detective in the NYPD. And no one really knows he sketches charcoal nudes. That's kind of something that's just, But he's looking for that woman. She's been looking for him. They don't know. That's all they know. And ultimately, they will come together in a rather cataclysmic manner that I think the reader will enjoy. But the two of them will join forces to go after the man called X, who is in a fortress, an old 14th century monastery in the Caucasus that he's taken over and refurbished, and who's developing these nuclear tipped rockets. He's Jewish, but he hates his race, very much like Lazar Kaganovich, who under Stalin ordered the deaths of millions and millions of his countrymen, and he was Jewish. So X is taken out of the history books. And so those two are going after him. As it turns out, the very last day, they know that these rockets will be really going off on the 13th of October, which happens to be the day that Hattie Abrams was born and her dad died. So now the reader enters October 13, hour by hour by hour, as the clock ticks down. All of these events are taking place, and ultimately it'll be up to Hattie and her battle buddy, her spotter, Shira Alien, who storm this fortress, which is impossible. But Wolf is not there at that moment. And as it turns out, I'm not going to give it away. I'm just going to say that it goes to the very last second. Well, Blood Sapphire's fury picks up from that moment. We know what happens to X, and in the last moment of his dying death, he says that there is someone, a business partner, another cajillionaire,
Hmm.
who has developed a virus that is spliced together of it's the smallpox, and it's got the there's three different viruses that are in this thing that are just make it absolutely lethal. And when and that he reveals the name of the guy who has outbid him in a bidding war and has 10 vials of this virus. He reveals the name. And Hattie and Wolf hear it. The message goes immediately to the Mossad, and they know immediately what they have to do. They're dead tired. They have to go after this guy who lives in Manhattan. He lives
Hmm.
all over the planet, but that's where he is. They have to stop the sale, because he's a broker, of
Hmm.
and one vial can take out Manhattan. And in fact, now that we understand viruses more and you do the reading, that's
Hmm.
very possible. So that's how the next book starts. Fury is where we're introduced to new characters. Wolf and Hattie are doing their best, but we have a whole new cast of characters
Sure.
who are working both for and against the an Armageddon kind of virus that could destroy America, whatever you name it.
Are there writers that you drew some inspiration from for your own writing? Because it sounds like I've interviewed people and I've talked with a lot of people, and I was in the military myself. I know a lot of people that went from military to writing as well. So I'm curious where you drew your inspiration from. Of course, your father, but were there others?
Well, I've read widely. I used to, when I went to seminary, I followed seminary, and I was a associate professor of science and theology at a liberal arts college in Los Angeles. So I taught
Mhm.
history, and I taught a lot of stuff. And so widely read, but I've always, when I want to kick back, I love Lee Childs and Jack Reacher and,
Hmm.
the Jason Bourne stuff. But my
Sure.
favorite of favorites is Elizabeth Salander. She's on that kind of spectrum of out there, genius computer, but Elizabeth is something else. you know. And when I read the Millennium Trilogy, a lot of what I took, a lot of what formed Hattie Abrams is taken from Lisbeth Salander.
Okay.
But at the same time, a lot of the Jack Reacher and Jason Bourne and all of these characters who have their quirks. Hattie Abrams has her quirks. She walks around in an apartment nude. That is her habit. That's what she
Hmm.
does. And Shira says that is a strange habit. I mean, that's weird. She says, "Well, get over it. That's just life. Get over it." So Hattie has her quirks. She's wacky in her own way. She's very freighted with all of this melancholy and the meaning of life and all of that. But you see similar things in these genres of thrillers and military thrillers, where if the writer wants to open up the character of their protagonist, you're quickly looking at a character who's out there firing weapons and killing people. And to
Sure.
me, okay, I'm under orders to do it, but there is a huge moral, the whole We have you might call it an epidemic of PTSD. And in fact, Hattie Abrams will have PTSD. You're affected by trauma in its most real form,
Sure.
and then there's all the moral issues going into it. So I'm challenged by all of that.
I have a friend that I play Call of Duty with because, of course, I'm 51 years old and I still play video games. I'm not going to stop, unapologetically. And he is a former Army guy like me, but he was a 11 Bravo ground pounder infantry special ops kind of guy. And he suffers from PTSD as well. But what's
Yeah.
interesting is what will bring him out of his funk is actually playing Call of Duty with me. And I think, I would be very interested in the psychology behind why that works, but he feels a lot better after he spent some time playing. I don't know.
Yes. Uh, Interesting. Shira and Hattie, their favorite game is Call of Duty. When they want to unwind, they do Call of Duty. But
Yep.
after her blast trauma,
Mhm.
the other thing that's present in the book that I haven't discussed is when she wakes up in the ICU after 3 days in a coma,
Mhm.
she sees a vision of a boy on fire who's holding a music box. And she goes to swat it away. And of course, the nurse is saying it's the morphine and you're just hallucinations. Don't worry, it'll go away.
Mhm.
But as the story develops, this music box and this boy on fire grips her and grips her and grips her until finally she talks with her mother, who is a real clairvoyant. And she
Mhm.
says, Mom, did we ever have a music box in our house? And her mother says, No, no. Grandpa used to have one, but I think he threw it away or he sold it. And then she comes back a few days later and says, Wait a minute. He still has that music box and it's in the closet. And Hetty goes, I don't know why, but I've got to get my hands on that music box.
Hmm.
And so, in the midst of her, and she's trying to figure out who is this boy on fire. Well, as the reader will discover, don't want to give too much away, but young Wolf James in little Ukraine in Manhattan, when his family's house is burned down, he's coming home from school, and the photographers are taking a picture of this little boy being held by the firefighters, and he's backlit in flames.
Hmm.
Wolf James is the boy on fire. And so she is pulled towards her grandfather's house in Southampton to find the solve what is this music box saying? And in fact, it holds the key to unraveling more about X. Who is this guy?
Hmm.
And in all of this, there is healing for
Mhm.
Hattie Abrams. She struggles with the PTSD. When the F 16s come over the desert and she's in a Spec Ops desert recovering, she's out there walking. The sonic boom goes past her because they're only 100 feet off the ground. I've been
Mhm.
in Israel when they've done that, and it's shocking.
Yeah.
You're just there, and all of a sudden, a flight of four just comes over. Boom, they're gone. And she's thrown into that moment of being blown up.
Mhm.
And she has to work through that. And in fact, I have a section I could read if you want me to do that.
Sure.
Okay.
Go for it. Absolutely.
Okay, well, this is midway in the book. Hattie Abrams is is on the run from someone she's running from X and the bad guy. She doesn't really know that though.
Mhm.
And she's being drawn back to Southampton, as I just mentioned. And she basically escapes from the Shin Bet counter-intel people in Israel have put her in this spec ops base out in the desert. And she makes an arrangement with the chief sergeant, says, I got to get out of here. My life is not safe. And he helps her get to Ashdod. And in Ashdod, she finds this boat. It's a cigarette racer. And she gets on board because they're going to Rome. And so this is day 23. This is in Lagrena, Greece. It's Tuesday, October the 10th. There's only 3 days left. 0300 hours, 3 in the morning. And the Astria floated quietly in Lagrena while Hattie slept with one eye open. At 3 a.m., the engines gurgled and the lights of the port city faded from her window. Hungry, she stole into the galley. The wheelhouse door lay ajar, and she overheard the captain say, the syndicate won the bid. The seaman replied in tandem, how much? $48,000. But when Piaro sees her, I think more, replied Captain Dimas. We'll take her tonight in Marsala. Warn Xuthus, no touching. A cold wave of fear spiraled down Hattie's spine, and she crept back to the stateroom. She practiced breathing and calmed down, but her stomach continued to growl for food. An hour passed, and Hattie opened the door. The engines roared and the waves splashed as the boat sliced through the water. She steadied her movements against the bouncing by keeping her hands on the wall. Cool air met her face. The odors of food and carnauba wax mixed together. Hattie touched her Glock and the knife tucked in her waistband. A single light cast a dim glow over the stove in the narrow, deserted galley. Balancing herself, Hattie planted her feet on the tiled floor as the vessel bounced and swayed. She filled a bowl with stew and tossed in a loaf of bread. Hattie heard a rustling behind her and whipped around. Xuthus had the same idea of an early morning snack, and in the soft light, Hattie's silhouette stood out. The big man downshifted to first gear. His motion slowed as two small eyes fixed themselves on the woman like lasers. He put down his plate, the size of a tea saucer in his hand, and stepped towards her, mesmerized by this shiny toy. Xuthus reached out, his fingers inches from Hattie's face, and speaking in a high-pitched cat-like meow, said, "Let me pet your hair." Hattie instinctively stepped back and bumped against the stove. Her right hand went to the pistol, while the other pushed the lion's paw aside. "Not today, big fella, or ever," she said, and glanced left and right for a way out. Xuthus's eyes hardened and voice darkened. "I want to pet it." With surprising quickness, the giant stretched out his arms like an albatross wings and boxed her in. He towered over her. "The captain won't hear. Don't scream like the others." Hattie's chest seized in panic. Her body became mush as her worst fear materialized like a ghost ship from the fog. The Glock had no legs. The knife had no hands. The Xuthus squealed in the light and put his palm on her head. Then he grabbed one breast. Like a magician's fire, Hattie's rape flashed up. She was falling under the blows from long ago, tied up and spread open for this giant. The claustrophobia clamped down on her throat. Xuthus touched her pelvis. Suddenly, in her chest, Hattie felt the fiery lightsaber come alive and an inner voice say, "When you hear the blast of war, summon your rage and strike like a tiger." Like an explosion from a cannon, Hattie's hand shot out. Aiming for the back of Zuthu's throat, her fingers sliced through his skin like the paper bag. They stopped at the spinal cord. On their way out, the fingers snapped shut like a bear trap and ripped out the windpipe, arteries, veins, and all. Blood sprayed like water from the fire hydrants over the ceiling and walls of the galley. Xuthus turned pale. His eyes glazed over. The giant toppled like a redwood and landed on the floor with a loud crash. A pool of dark blood spread out beneath the Leviathan as the skipper rushed in and yelled for his mates. The younger seaman ran in and saw his brother. He fell on the mountain of flesh and let out a blood-curdling scream. The skipper and the barrel-chested seaman stared open-mouthed at the terrible blonde who held an enormous chicken neck in her hand. As her blood boiled, Hattie snarled, "Fresh meat for your fucking fish stew."
I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah, that's
That was
kind of
good.
a that. Yeah, that's the way the book, basically the book.
I love it. It's a good. I think it's a good snippet, a good taste, a good teaser, if you will.
Yeah.
So, what are your future plans for the storyline? Do you
Well,
have?
what?
I know you talked about a third book.
Well, when I started writing, I I tend to write. Well, I started writing and realized that people would read snippets and go, "This reads like a movie." I
Hmm.
feel like I'm in a movie theater.
Hmm.
And so when the book was finally done and was published in 2022, I got a copy to a an award-winning screenwriter,
Hmm.
which is anyway, that's a story in itself. But anyway, that individual read the book, got on the phone, and said, "I love this book. And this is not a movie. This is a series on TV. We've got
Hmm.
5 years of episodes in this book.
Hmm.
And I'd like to write the episodes." And so, as of today, he's putting the finishing touches on episode 3.
Hmm.
And the guy is a master.
Hmm.
So, the next step is a what's called a pitch deck, and then you give it to a production agent who then takes us around to motion picture studios, and we're hoping to get some attention from Netflix or whomever. So
Yeah.
that's kind of over here while I'm attending to Blood, Sapphire's Fury,
Hmm.
and my book marketing gentleman is amazing,
Hmm.
Rick Light, and he has all sorts of plans for me.
Yeah. It's helpful to have those people on your side. That's for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Bruce, I got to tell you, thank. Oh, you know what? I almost forgot. The most important question I ever ask on this show, without a doubt, is where can people find your work?
Well, it's it's on Amazon under Blood Sapphire's Revenge. I mean, it's so you can go to Amazon, lots of reviews, and you can get it in the Kindle, the Audible. I did the Audible. We have a print and a hard copy, and it's being reissued this month as a second edition.
Oh,
So
cool.
we've won many awards, which totally grateful for, 5-star awards, and so we got a great statement from Kirkus Reviews. So we're having that put on the front. So we're having the book redone so that it reflects the reviews and all of that. And but it'll be in under the Ingram Spark label, so you can get it at you know Barnes and Nobles worldwide, wherever. But
Hmm.
at the moment, right now, just go to Amazon.
Or you can go to his website as well, which I will put that up as well,
Yes,
so
go to my
people
website.
know where
It's
to find you.
drbrucepalmer.com.
Yep. Absolutely. And I will make sure people have that up on the screen so
Yeah.
that they know where to go. Well, thank you, Bruce, for taking the time with me. I always am humbled and very, very thankful that people want to come spend time with me on the show.
Well, I kind of have the same feelings about you having me on your show.
Well, if people didn't want to come on the show would never happen, and I don't know what I'd be doing with all my copious spare time. Probably writing more. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah.
Collecting more antique weapons. Who knows? Well,
Yeah.
on behalf of all things writing, I'm Brian the writer, and I appreciate you spending time with us and my guest, Bruce. Please tune in when I'm going to have another episode coming out. I don't know who I'm interviewing next, to be honest, but I'm sure that'll materialize. I have a couple of people out there that I'm thinking about doing. But go out and check out Bruce's book. Go out and do it right now, because we're at the end of the show anyway. So this is All Things Writing, and Brian the Writer signing off. This has been another amazing episode of All Things Writing. If you heard something that got your wheels spinning, check out the links in the show notes. Also, please follow the show and remember to leave those reviews. Those simple acts of kindness mean the world to us. Hop on over to briannowak.com, and that is Brian with a Y, and check out my latest novels. I'm on Amazon or wherever you buy your ebooks. And as a reminder, the music you heard on the show today was used under license from the artist Ryan Ancona. Thanks for listening to the show, and have a blessed day.